No one told Ethan Cole that the worst part of space wasn't the silence. It was when everything suddenly stopped making sense. The emergency deck of Outpost K-17 had been designed for efficiency, not drama, but tonight it felt like the entire station had decided to hold its breath. The overhead lights dimmed and brightened in uneven pulses, as if the system couldn't quite decide whether this moment deserved urgency or reverence. A transport vessel had just landed without clearance, its hull marked with symbols Ethan recognized only from training manuals no one expected to use in real life. Royal insignia. That alone should have meant order, precision, control. Instead, it meant chaos. Personnel crowded the medical bay in tight, uneasy clusters, speaking in low voices that never quite rose above a whisper. Not fear exactly. Something heavier. Respect, maybe. Or the kind of caution people used when they knew they were standing too close to something important. Ethan stayed near the back, adjusting the sleeve of his worn field jacket like it might suddenly become more official if he tried hard enough. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was third rotation support, the kind of assignment that mostly involved recalibrating scanners and pretending the coffee didn't taste like regret. Whatever had arrived on that ship was far above his clearance, his pay grade, and his general life expectations. The doors to the inner chamber slid open with a soft, reluctant sound, and the room shifted. It wasn't visible, not exactly, but Ethan felt it anyway. Conversations died mid-sentence. A tray clinked somewhere and then didn't move again. Even the air seemed to settle into something quieter, more careful. They brought her in surrounded by a field of soft light, her form partially obscured by layered medical projections that flickered and adjusted in real time. At first glance, she looked human. That was the first mistake. Her posture, even unconscious, carried a kind of authority that didn't belong to someone lying still. Dark hair framed a face too composed for panic, too precise for coincidence. And then there were the ears, long, elegant, tapering slightly beyond anything evolution on Earth had ever signed off on. They didn't move. They didn't need to. The entire room adjusted around them anyway. Stabilization failing, one of the senior medics said, voice carefully neutral in the way people sounded when they were trying not to admit something final. Another voice followed, sharper. Her biology isn't responding to standard protocols. Ethan leaned slightly to get a better look at the monitors. The data scrolled in complex layers, color-coded systems flashing warnings that felt less like alarms and more like quiet conclusions. He frowned. Not dramatically, just enough for his brain to start doing that thing it did when something didn't add up. The patterns were wrong. Not chaotic. Not broken. Just misread. Like someone had tried to translate a language and gotten all the words technically correct while missing the meaning entirely. He exhaled slowly. That's not failure, he muttered under his breath. That's interference. No one heard him, which was good, because Ethan wasn't entirely sure he was right. He just knew the system was reacting like it was being told to solve the wrong problem. He stepped forward before he could talk himself out of it, the kind of small, accidental movement that changes everything later. No one stopped him, not because he had permission, but because no one expected him to matter enough to notice. The field around her flickered as he got closer, the projections shifting slightly, recalibrating. Ethan tilted his head, studying the readouts like they might apologize if he stared long enough. Okay, he said quietly, mostly to himself. Either I'm about to make a very bad decision, or everyone else already did. And for the first time since the ship arrived, something in the room changed direction. The closer Ethan stepped, the more the system seemed to hesitate around him, like it was recalculating something it had already decided. The medical field shimmered, its soft blue light bending just slightly toward his hand before stabilizing again. He noticed that first. Not the alarms, not the quiet tension behind him, but the way the system adjusted as if it recognized him without understanding why. That was new. Ethan tilted his head, scanning the layered diagnostics again. The readings were still wrong, but now they were wrong in a different way, less chaotic, more responsive. Like a conversation that had finally switched languages. You are not treating the cause, he said, louder this time, before he could stop himself. A few heads turned. Not many. Just enough to remind him he had crossed from invisible to mildly inconvenient. One of the senior physicians, tall, composed, and radiating the kind of authority that came with never being questioned, glanced at him with polite dismissal. "Step back," she said evenly. "This is not your station." Ethan nodded automatically. That was usually where his involvement ended in situations like this. A quiet apology, a step back, and a mental note to rethink his life choices. Instead, he stayed exactly where he was. "The system is suppressing her response," he continued, keeping his voice calm, almost conversational. "It thinks it is stabilizing, but it is actually blocking the recovery mechanism." Silence answered him, but it was a different kind now. Not the heavy, respectful silence from before, but something sharper. Evaluating. The physician's gaze narrowed slightly. "On what basis?" Ethan gestured toward the main display, careful not to touch anything yet. "Cross-species signal conflict," he said. "Your protocols are reading her biology like it is static." "It is not static. It is adaptive. You are treating the adaptation as damage." A faint shift moved through the room. Subtle but real. Someone adjusted a setting on a nearby console. Another leaned closer to the data. Ethan could feel the weight of attention settling on him. Not fully hostile, not yet convinced, but no longer ignoring him either. The physician hesitated for half a second. It was enough. "And your solution?" she asked. Ethan exhaled slowly, already regretting everything and nothing at the same time. "Stop forcing the override," he said. "Let her system reinitialize on its own terms. You are trying to control something that is designed to survive without you." That earned him a few looks that were not polite. One of the technicians actually made a quiet sound that might have been disbelief or concern. The physician's expression remained composed, but her posture shifted just slightly, a sign that the idea had reached her even if she did not want it to. "That would remove our control entirely," she said. "Yes," Ethan agreed. "That is the point." For a moment, no one moved. The monitors continued their steady, uncertain rhythm, numbers rising and falling in patterns that felt unresolved. Then something unexpected happened. The woman on the table moved. It was small, barely visible. A slight tightening of her fingers, a subtle shift in the angle of her wrist. But the effect was immediate. Every head turned. The physician stepped closer, eyes flicking across the readings. "There was no external trigger," someone whispered. Ethan did not say anything. He just watched the data, watched the system try to explain what it did not understand. The numbers began to stabilize, not dramatically, not in a way that would impress a report, but in a way that felt correct, like a sentence finally finishing itself. The physician looked at him again, and this time the dismissal was gone. Not replaced with trust, not yet, but with something far more dangerous. Consideration. "If we follow your approach," she said carefully, "and you are wrong." Ethan allowed himself a small, tired smile. "Then I will finally have a good explanation for why I should not be here," he replied. A few people almost laughed. Almost. The physician studied him for one long second, then turned back to the console. "Reduce intervention protocols," she ordered. "Minimal guidance only." The system hesitated, then complied. The room shifted again, quieter now, but charged with something new. Expectation. Ethan stepped closer without thinking, drawn by the subtle change in the field. The light bent again, more noticeably this time, as if welcoming the proximity. He frowned slightly. "That is," he began, then stopped. The woman's hand moved again, more clearly now. Her fingers curled, slow but deliberate, and before Ethan could step back, they closed gently around his wrist. The contact was not forceful. It did not need to be. The entire room froze anyway. Ethan blinked, looking down at her hand, then back at the monitors, which had just done something none of them had seen before. Every warning indicator turned green at once. For a moment, Ethan thought the system had glitched, because nothing in his experience suggested that everything should turn green at the same time. Not gradually, not cautiously, but instantly, as if some invisible threshold had been crossed, and the machine simply gave up arguing. He stared at the display, waiting for the correction, the inevitable flicker back to warning, but it did not come. The readings held steady, calm in a way that felt almost deliberate. Behind him, someone exhaled sharply, the sound loud in a room that had forgotten how to breathe. "That is not possible," the senior physician said. But her voice lacked conviction now, like she was reciting a rule that reality had just decided to ignore. Ethan did not answer. He was too focused on the hand around his wrist. It was warm, steady, and far more intentional than the situation should have allowed. This was not reflex. This was not random movement. He glanced down slowly, then back up at her face. Her eyes were still closed, her expression unchanged, but something about the set of her features had shifted. Not softer, sharper, as if some internal alignment had clicked into place. Is she conscious? Someone asked. No, another replied quickly. Neural activity does not indicate full awareness. Ethan frowned slightly. Then she has very good instincts, he muttered. The physician stepped closer, her attention now split between the data and the point of contact. Remove your hand, she said. It sounded reasonable. It also sounded like a very good way to break whatever fragile balance had just formed. Ethan hesitated, just long enough for the monitors to react. The moment his wrist shifted even slightly within her grip, one of the outer indicators flickered. Not red. Not yet. Just uncertain. The kind of warning that suggested the system was reconsidering its optimism. The physician saw it too. She did not repeat the order. Instead, she adjusted her posture, recalibrating her understanding of the situation in real time. Maintain position, she said instead, voice controlled but unmistakably different now. Not authority. Adaptation. Ethan gave a small nod, as if this had been his plan all along, which it absolutely had not. I can do that, he said. Standing still is one of my better skills. A few of the technicians exchanged glances, the kind that carried equal parts confusion and reluctant respect. The data continued to stabilize, patterns smoothing out into something coherent, something that no longer looked like a system in distress. Ethan watched the progression, his mind quietly assembling possibilities he was not sure he wanted to understand yet. This was not just compatibility. This was alignment. On a level that should not exist between species that had met, at best, in textbooks. Cross-reference genetic response markers, the physician ordered. Full spectrum. The system complied, projecting a new layer of data into the air. Lines of code, biological signatures, compatibility matrices that shifted and recalculated faster than most of the room could follow. Ethan caught fragments, enough to feel the shape of the answer forming. Then the system paused. Not a delay, a decision point. A single line of text appeared at the center of the display, crisp and unambiguous. Ethan read it once, then again, because his brain insisted on checking. Around him, the silence deepened into something almost physical. That classification does not exist, one of the technicians whispered. The physician did not respond immediately. Her eyes were fixed on the display, her expression carefully neutral in the way people looked when they were one step away from reacting and had decided, very deliberately, not to. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, still careful not to pull away. I am going to guess, he said quietly, that this is the part where someone tells me I should be concerned. No one answered him. They were all looking at the same line. The same conclusion the system had reached without asking permission. Ethan followed their gaze, then glanced back at the woman whose hand had not loosened its hold on him for a second. Right? He added under his breath. That seems fair. The lights in the chamber dimmed just slightly, as if the station itself was adjusting to a new reality it had not been programmed to expect. And for the first time since the ship arrived, Ethan had the distinct feeling that he was no longer just helping solve a problem. He was becoming part of it. The line on the display did not disappear, which somehow made it worse, because systems were supposed to correct themselves when they were wrong, and this one was behaving like it had nothing to apologize for. Ethan stared at it a second longer than necessary, then looked away, not because he did not understand it, but because he understood just enough to know it would complicate his day in ways he had not planned for. The senior physician stepped closer to the projection, her hand hovering just short of the interface, as if she was considering whether touching it might change the answer. It did not. The text remained steady, precise, and entirely uninterested in human discomfort. Around them, the technicians had stopped pretending to be calm. Small movements gave them away. A shoulder tightening. A breath held too long. One of the consoles emitted a soft recalibration tone, then fell silent again, as if even the station preferred not to comment. Run it again, the physician said. The system complied immediately, recalculating across every available parameter, expanding the dataset, verifying inputs, cross-checking outputs. The result returned identical. Not similar. Not close. Identical. That kind of consistency was not reassuring. It was final. Ethan shifted slightly, careful to keep his wrist within the gentle but unyielding hold of the woman on the table. Her grip had not loosened, not even by a fraction, and the monitors responded to that continuity with quiet approval. He noticed that now. The system was no longer reacting to her condition alone. It was reacting to both of them. Okay, he said under his breath, more thoughtful than alarmed. That is new. The physician turned to him, and this time there was no dismissal left in her expression at all. Only focus. Explain, she said. It was not a request for authority. It was a request for insight. Ethan considered that for a moment, which was impressive given that he did not actually have an explanation he trusted yet. I think, he began slowly, that your system just stopped treating us as separate variables. That earned him a few looks that were not entirely friendly, but no one interrupted him. It is reading her recovery as dependent on an external constant, he continued, which, for the record, I was not aware I qualified as. A technician swallowed audibly. That would imply, he started, then stopped, as if the rest of the sentence had decided it was safer not to exist out loud. The physician finished it anyway, her voice calm and controlled. It would imply a bonded response. The words settled into the room with a weight that did not need explanation. Ethan blinked once. Bonded, he repeated, as if saying it might make it less complicated. That sounds like a word with consequences. No one disagreed. The system pulsed softly, the light field around the woman adjusting again, smoother now, more stable than it had been since her arrival. Ethan felt the subtle shift through the contact at his wrist, like a rhythm syncing that had not been there before. He resisted the urge to test it further. Some experiments did not need encouragement. Cross-reference cultural and legal frameworks, the physician ordered. The system hesitated for the first time since the recalculation began, a brief pause that suggested it was accessing something deeper, something less frequently used. Then new data surfaced, structured differently, categorized not by biology, but by protocol. Ethan read the first few lines and immediately wished he had not. Oh, he said quietly. That is very official. The technician beside him made a strange sound. That classification is restricted to royal lineage protocols, he said. It is not supposed to trigger outside controlled conditions. Ethan nodded slowly, still watching the display. Well, he replied, tone dry but steady. It seems no one informed the situation. The physician did not smile. She was too busy recalibrating the implications. If this is accurate, she said carefully, then her recovery is no longer a medical variable. It is a relational one. Ethan considered that, then glanced down at the woman whose hand still held his wrist with quiet certainty. That explains why letting go seems like a bad idea, he said. As if in response, her fingers tightened just slightly, not enough to alarm, but enough to confirm awareness on a level the monitors had not yet caught up to. The room noticed. Of course they did. Every subtle change carried weight now. Ethan exhaled slowly, the sound almost lost in the charged silence. I am starting to think, he added, that I did not just help fix a problem. The physician met his gaze, her expression composed but no longer neutral. No, she said. You changed its definition. And somewhere beneath the steady hum of the station, something larger shifted into place, as if a decision had been made that none of them had been invited to vote on. The room did not return to normal after that, because there was no version of normal that included a system quietly redefining the relationship between a human technician and an alien royal figure. Instead, everything settled into a new kind of stillness, one that felt less like shock and more like careful observation. Ethan remained where he was, his wrist still held in a grip that was neither urgent nor optional, and for the first time since this started, he became aware that people were no longer just watching the monitors. They were watching him. He shifted slightly, not enough to trigger another flicker in the system, just enough to remind himself that he was still a person and not a variable on a screen. All right, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. This is officially outside my training. No one laughed this time. The physician turned back to the display, her expression sharpened by a focus that had moved beyond skepticism. Expand the legal cross-reference, she instructed. Full archive access. The system hesitated again, longer now, as if it was reaching into sections of its database that had not been accessed in years, possibly decades. When the data appeared, it did so with a different visual structure, less clinical, more formal, like a document that expected to be respected rather than analyzed. Ethan glanced at the headings and immediately felt the kind of clarity that came right before complications. "That looks important," he said. A technician nodded stiffly. "It is not just important," he replied. "It is binding." That word carried more weight than any alarm the system had produced earlier. Binding did not leave room for interpretation. Binding meant that whatever had just been identified was not a suggestion. It was a rule. Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting back to the woman on the table. Her expression remained composed, but there was something different now, something beneath the stillness that felt present. Not fully awake, not yet, but not absent either. Like someone listening from just behind a closed door. "If this is what I think it is," Ethan said carefully, "then this is not just about her recovery anymore." "No," the physician agreed, her voice measured. "It is about recognition." The system responded to that word in a way that made several people in the room straighten unconsciously. A new layer of data unfolded, not biological, not technical, but symbolic. Markers, designations, classifications tied to lineage, authority, and something older than both. Ethan read enough to understand the direction, even if he did not understand the full language. "You have got to be kidding me," he murmured. The technician beside him did not look away from the display. "The protocol requires confirmation," he said. "From both parties." Ethan blinked. "Both parties," he repeated. "I feel like I should have been consulted before becoming a party to anything." No one responded to that either, which was becoming a theme. The system pulsed again, softer this time, almost expectant. The physician glanced between the display and Ethan, her expression unreadable for a moment before settling into something that resembled cautious acceptance. "The process has already begun," she said. Ethan followed her gaze down to the point where their hands were still connected. He did not remember agreeing to that process, but the system clearly did not consider that a requirement. "Right?" he said under his breath. "Of course it has." As if in response to the shift in attention, the woman's fingers tightened slightly again, not enough to restrain, just enough to communicate. This time, her eyes moved. It was subtle, a faint adjustment beneath her closed lids, but it was unmistakable. The room reacted instantly, every posture sharpening, every breath held just a fraction longer. Ethan felt the change through the contact before he fully saw it. "She is coming back," someone whispered. The physician did not speak, but her focus locked onto the woman with complete precision. The monitors adjusted again, not in alarm, but in alignment, as if they were no longer tracking a crisis but following a transition. Ethan stayed exactly where he was, suddenly very aware that whatever happened next was not something he could step away from, even if he wanted to. The lights above dimmed slightly, the system recalibrating to a state that felt less like emergency and more like arrival. And for the first time since the ship had landed, the silence in the room did not feel uncertain. It felt like anticipation. The first thing that changed was not her breathing, not the monitors, but the atmosphere itself, as if the room had quietly decided that whatever was happening now required its full attention. Ethan felt it before he saw it, a subtle shift traveling through the contact at his wrist, steady and deliberate, like a signal that had finally found the right frequency. Her fingers tightened again, not with urgency, but with certainty. Then her eyes opened. Not slowly, not dramatically, just all at once, as if she had simply chosen to return. The effect was immediate. Every sound in the chamber seemed to step back, leaving a space around her that felt almost deliberate. Her gaze moved first to the ceiling, tracking the light for a brief second, then to the monitors, absorbing the data with a calm that suggested familiarity rather than confusion. Finally, her eyes settled on Ethan. That was when the room truly stopped. There was no hesitation in her expression, no disorientation, no trace of someone recovering from the edge of failure. Instead, there was focus, sharp and controlled, the kind that belonged to someone used to being in command of every situation she entered. Her eyes moved over his face with quiet precision, as if confirming something she had already decided. Ethan blinked once, then offered the only response his brain could assemble under the circumstances. "Hi," he said, because apparently that was what came out when reality stopped following expected patterns. A faint shift touched the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, but close enough to suggest she understood the tone even if the word itself held little meaning to her. Around them, the system responded with a soft recalibration tone, adjusting its parameters to match a state it had not been programmed to predict. The physician stepped forward, careful, measured, as if approaching a moment that could change direction without warning. "Your condition has stabilized," she said, voice even. "We are maintaining minimal intervention protocols." The woman did not look at her. Her attention remained on Ethan, her grip on his wrist steady, unbroken. When she spoke, her voice was low, precise, carrying a resonance that seemed to align with the room itself. "You remained," she said. It was not a question. Ethan glanced down briefly at their joined hands, then back at her. "I was advised not to move," he replied. It seemed like a good suggestion at the time. That earned him a pause, the kind that suggested she was processing not just the words, but the intent behind them. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in focus. "You intervened," she continued. Again, not a question. Ethan shrugged faintly. "I made a suggestion," he said. "Your system did most of the work." The monitors flickered softly, as if mildly offended by the understatement. The physician did not interrupt, but her attention sharpened, watching the exchange as carefully as she had watched the data. The woman's gaze shifted briefly to the display, then back to Ethan, her expression settling into something more defined now, something that carried weight beyond the immediate moment. "The system adapted," she said. "To you." Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again, deciding that this was probably not the time to argue with a statement that sounded both accurate and complicated. "That appears to be the working theory," he admitted. Silence followed, but it was not empty. It was full, dense with meaning that had not yet been spoken. The system pulsed again, softer now, almost anticipatory, and a new layer of data began to form in the air above them, symbols and classifications aligning into something that felt less like analysis and more like confirmation. The woman did not look at it. She did not need to. Her focus remained fixed on Ethan, her posture unchanged, her grip still steady, as if the connection between them was the only variable that mattered. Ethan became aware, with a growing sense of clarity, that whatever had been set in motion had already passed the point where it could be undone. He exhaled slowly, the sound quiet but grounding. "I have a feeling," he said carefully, "that this is where things get more complicated." The faintest hint of that almost smile returned, not soft, not warm, but certain. "No," she said, "this is where they become clear." And for reasons he could not fully explain, that was somehow more concerning. The data above them finished aligning with a quiet finality that felt less like computation and more like a verdict. No alarms followed, no warnings, no uncertainty. Just a clean, structured declaration written in a system language that did not leave room for interpretation. Ethan glanced up at it again, slower this time, reading past the surface and into the implication beneath it. He did not need to understand every symbol to recognize what kind of conclusion required this much silence. Around him, no one spoke. Not because they had nothing to say, but because anything said too soon would sound like disagreement with something that had already decided it was correct. The physician stepped forward, her posture precise, her control absolute, but even she did not interrupt the moment immediately. Instead, she observed, confirming what the system had already confirmed, as if the act of witnessing it mattered. Verification complete, the system announced softly, its tone neutral but weighted with authority. That changed everything. Ethan exhaled through his nose, slow and measured. "That sounds official," he murmured. "It is," the physician replied. Her voice was steady, but the edges of it had sharpened, as if every word now carried legal gravity. "The protocol has recognized a bond state under royal classification." Ethan blinked once. "Bond state," he repeated, then nodded slightly. "Right. That is still a lot of words for something I do not remember signing." The faintest flicker of reaction passed through a few of the technicians, quickly suppressed. The woman did not look at them. She did not look at the system either. Her gaze remained on Ethan, unwavering, as if the declaration above them was merely a formality for something she had already accepted. "It does not require your signature," she said calmly. "It requires your presence." Ethan considered that, then glanced briefly at their hands again, still connected, still unchanged despite everything that had just shifted around them. I am starting to notice a pattern, he said. My involvement seems to be less optional than I would prefer. That almost smile returned, sharper this time, more defined. Correct, she said. The system pulsed once more, and a new layer of information unfolded, not for analysis, but for confirmation. Titles, classifications, designations tied to her identity began to surface, each one carrying weight, each one reinforcing a single, unavoidable fact. Ethan followed the structure, piecing it together with the same quiet logic that had led him here in the first place. Then he stopped. Okay, he said slowly. I feel like there is a part of this that everyone else already understands, and I am just arriving late to. No one corrected him. The physician inclined her head slightly, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. She is not simply a patient, she said. She is Queen Soraya. The name settled into the room like a second gravity field, subtle but undeniable. Ethan absorbed that for a second, then another, his expression shifting from mild confusion to something more focused. Of course she is, he said quietly. That explains the part where everything became significantly more complicated. Soraya did not react to the statement itself, but her eyes sharpened slightly, as if evaluating his response rather than the information. You understand the implication, she said. Ethan let out a small breath, somewhere between a sigh and a quiet laugh. I understand that I helped stabilize someone important, he said. And now your system thinks I am involved. Not thinks, Soraya corrected. Recognizes. The distinction mattered. He could hear it in the way she said it, in the way the room accepted it without challenge. Ethan nodded slowly, adjusting to the weight of that single word. Recognizes, he echoed. That is a stronger version. The silence that followed was no longer uncertain. It was settled, shaped by a reality that had already taken hold. The technicians did not question it. The system did not revise it. Even the physician, who had resisted every step until now, stood in quiet alignment with the outcome. Ethan looked around once, taking in the room, the people, the systems that had all shifted their expectations in the span of a few minutes. Then he looked back at Soraya, at the calm certainty in her expression, at the hand that had never released his. All right, he said, voice steady despite the situation. If this is recognized, then I am going to assume there is a next step. Soraya held his gaze, her presence unshaken, her tone precise. There is, she said. And for the first time since the system made its decision, there was no ambiguity left in the room at all. The room did not move forward until she did. It was not a command, not spoken, not signaled, but the effect was the same. Every system, every person, every quiet calculation seemed to pause at the edge of her next action, waiting for direction that no one else was qualified to give. Soraya shifted her gaze slightly, not away from Ethan, but past him for a fraction of a second, acknowledging the space, the people, the reality that had just been reshaped. Then her attention returned to him, absolute and undivided. The hand around his wrist did not loosen. If anything, it settled, as if the connection had moved from incidental to intentional. Ethan noticed that immediately. I am going to guess, he said carefully, that the next step is not optional either. Soraya's expression did not change, but something in her posture aligned with his words, a quiet confirmation. No, she said. The physician stepped forward, her voice precise, controlled, but carrying a new weight that had not been there before. Your Majesty, the protocol requires formal acknowledgement. The title landed in the room with the kind of clarity that erased any remaining doubt about who she was and what her words would mean next. Ethan glanced briefly at the physician, then back at Soraya. That sounds official, he murmured. It is, the physician replied. The recognition must be stated. The system above them pulsed once, the light shifting into a configuration that felt less like a diagnostic interface and more like a witness. Ethan became aware, with a growing sense of inevitability, that whatever happened next was not just for the people in the room. It was being recorded, confirmed, embedded into something larger than all of them. Soraya did not look at the system. She did not look at the physician. She looked at Ethan. Only Ethan. The silence stretched, not awkward, not uncertain, but deliberate, as if giving the moment exactly the space it required. Then she spoke. Her voice was calm, precise, carrying a resonance that seemed to settle into the structure of the room itself. You are my husband, human. No one reacted immediately. That was the first sign of how significant the statement was. The room did not erupt. It did not question. It froze, completely and absolutely, as if even the concept of response required permission that had not yet been granted. Ethan blinked once. Then again, because his brain insisted on verifying that he had heard that correctly. "I see," he said slowly, because apparently that was the only safe response available. The system above them responded instantly. The display shifted, the symbols rearranging into a finalized structure, confirmations cascading through layers of protocol that extended far beyond the station. A soft tone followed, not an alarm, not a warning, but something closer to completion. The physician lowered her head slightly, not deeply, not dramatically, but enough to signal acknowledgement. Around her, the technicians followed, their movements subtle but unified, as if guided by a rule they had not needed to be reminded of. Ethan noticed that too. Of course he did. He noticed everything now. "So," he said quietly, glancing once at the system, then back at Soraya, "that is legally binding, I assume." "Yes," the physician answered before Soraya could. "Across all recognized territories." Ethan exhaled slowly, processing that in the same calm, slightly detached way he approached most problems. "Right," he said. "Of course it is." Soraya's grip on his wrist shifted, not loosening, but adjusting, guiding his hand slightly forward, as if aligning him with the new reality that had just been declared. Her gaze did not waver. "You stabilized my life," she said. "Now you remain within it." The statement was simple. The implication was not. Ethan held her gaze, steady despite everything, his expression settling into something that was no longer confusion, but acceptance mixed with a very human awareness that his life had just taken a turn no one had prepared him for. "I am beginning to understand," he said. The room did not move. The system did not change. The decision had been made, spoken, and recognized. And for the first time since the ship had arrived, there was no uncertainty left about what came next, only the quiet, undeniable fact that nothing would return to what it had been before. The system did not dim after the declaration. It expanded, as if the station itself had recognized that the moment was not an endpoint but a beginning. New signals moved quietly through unseen channels, confirmations leaving the room faster than sound, carrying the weight of what had just been spoken far beyond the walls of the medical bay. Ethan felt it in the subtle shift of the air, in the way the silence changed from contained to observed. This was no longer a private event. This was something the universe had been informed of. He remained where he was, because moving still felt like a bad idea. His wrist still held, his position now less accidental and more defined. He glanced once at the people around him. No one questioned. No one objected. That was the part that settled the reality more than anything else. Systems could be wrong. People usually were not, especially when they all chose silence at the same time. Soraya released his wrist then, not abruptly, not as a dismissal, but with a controlled motion that suggested transition rather than separation. The absence of contact was immediate and noticeable, like a signal that had been sustaining something and had now shifted to a different state. Ethan flexed his hand slightly, more out of habit than necessity, then looked back at her. She was already sitting up, the medical field retracting around her as if it had completed its purpose. No hesitation, no weakness. The room adjusted around her again, instinctively, naturally, as if every element understood its place relative to her presence. The physician stepped back half a pace, not out of fear, but out of acknowledgement. Others followed without being told. Space was given. It always was. Soraya stood. The motion was smooth, unhurried, but it carried a finality that settled over the room like a closing statement. She did not test her balance. She did not check the monitors. She did not ask for confirmation. She already knew. Ethan watched her, his expression calm, but his mind quietly reorganizing everything he thought he understood about cause and effect. "You recover quickly," he said, because it felt like the kind of thing someone should say in a moment like this. Soraya turned to him fully, her gaze steady, her posture precise. "I recover correctly," she replied. That was somehow more definitive. The system above them shifted again, the display no longer showing diagnostics, but status. Titles, confirmations, alignment markers that placed Ethan's identity in direct relation to hers. He noticed that too, because of course he did. That is new, he said under his breath. Yes, Soraya answered without looking at the display. It is accurate. The physician approached again, more cautiously this time, her voice respectful but firm. Your Majesty, transport has been prepared. The council will require. Soraya raised one hand slightly. The physician stopped. No hesitation. No resistance. Just immediate compliance. Soraya's attention returned to Ethan. You will come with me, she said. Not a question. Not a suggestion. Ethan nodded once, slow and deliberate. Not because he had no choice, but because, at this point, denying the direction of events felt less reasonable than accepting it. I suspected that might be the case, he replied. A faint shift touched her expression again, that almost smile, restrained but present, like a recognition of something she found acceptable. She turned then, moving toward the exit with the same controlled certainty she had shown in every other action. The doors responded before she reached them, opening without command, the corridor beyond already cleared, already prepared. Ethan followed, because staying behind was no longer an option that made sense in any version of reality he could access. As he stepped through the threshold, he glanced back once at the room, at the systems, the people, the place where everything had shifted without warning. No one stopped him. No one called him back. They simply watched, the silence now different again, not uncertain, not shocked, but settled into something that resembled acceptance. The doors closed behind them with a soft, final sound, and as the corridor lights adjusted to their presence, Ethan became aware of something new, something subtle but undeniable. This was no longer a story about a problem he had solved. This was the beginning of something he had just become part of, whether he fully understood it or not. And for the first time since all of this began, he had the distinct feeling that the real complexity had not happened yet. It was waiting ahead,